Well, hello to anyone who's patched into this presentation. I want to share with you my background. I'm Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm an RPA. I've been doing cultural resource management work in California in the Great Basin and in Mexico for 40 years and have been responsible for many different sizes of reports, both publications, research publications, as well as cultural resource management reports. And I understand from my colleague through the Archaeology Podcast Network that one of the trainings, one of the presentations that has been asked for frequently is how to write a report. So I'm honored to provide you with what I call a primer for cultural resource managers and archaeologists, archaeological professionals, on how to write a report. And with that, I will move ahead. So what's a report? Well, in academics, there seems to be some overlap between what we call reports and essays. And those two words are sometimes used interchangeably. But reports are more likely to be needed for, business or scientific or technical subjects, and when we're engaged in consulting work. An essay presents more of an argument and reasoning. A report concentrates on facts, just the facts, ma'am. Essentially, a report is a short, sometimes, and other times, much, much longer, concise document which is written for a particular purpose and audience. It consists of a lot of words and pictures and tables and bibliography. So what a report does is sets out and analyzes a situation, a problem, and often makes a series of recommendations for future actions. It's a factual document, needs to be clear and well-structured, and requirements for the precise form and content of a report varies greatly between various organizations and departments. And what is absolutely imperative, meaning critically important, and in other words, to me, don't get this one wrong, silly, or we'll mess up the whole thing. We have to find out if there are any specific guidelines before we start. Is there a set of protocols, requirements, a set of instructions, call it an instruction manual or a handbook that we can go by and make certain that we are in alignment with what our client and what the various entities that we're developing the document for require. Now, to save time and energy, we ought to obtain a go-by. Well, what's a go-by? Well, a go-by is a completed, acceptable example of a report similar in content and character to the one you intend to write. So I typically ask for a detailed set of guidelines before we begin to write the report. Now, if we have that go-by, we have sort of a sense of the way in which the document will be organized and what information we're going to need to include in our report. Typically, a report includes the following sections. We have a title page, a table of contents, an executive summary, an introduction, a project description, some sort of background document, background of the project. To continue, we have a methods section, or the techniques we use to complete the assignment. We have a data presentation. We have analysis, conclusions, recommendations, references, tables, figures, which are typically photographs and charts, maps, and most importantly for many of these reports, because they are so complicated and contain so much information, we have a series of appendices. So, with my advice, number one, the centrally most important element before we start writing or developing a report is read the guidelines and read them carefully. If your teacher, professor, boss, client, or colleague provides you with these guidelines, I would read them thoroughly, several times, make notes on them, and make sure that you truly understand and completely and clearly appreciate all the nuances and elements of this assignment. Generally, these guidelines should give you very, very detailed information, such as who your audience is, any issues you should report. It should include things as specific as the font, the margins, the way in which they expect to see the document prepared. Often they have many, many, many elements that are absolutely meticulous and finite, and you need to adhere to every single one of those elements. If there are details within that guideline, within that protocol that one does not understand, please, please, please go back to the entity or the individuals who prepared those guidelines and ask them to clarify. So with the go-by and with the guidelines, we are certainly in a posture that we might begin to consider working upon our report. These guidelines usually tell you what the requirements are for the structure and the format of this report. And as I've mentioned, if anything is not completely clear and there's questions, please speak up as soon as possible. That way you don't start working on the report only to find out later on that you have to start all over again because you've misunderstood the guidelines. So I cannot emphasize that particular aspect of my presentation enough, as that is a critical element. I have been very guilty of that as well, not understanding some of the nuances and guidelines, and we had to go back and reformat the report and change things and do things a little differently. So it's, as they say, when you go to cut down a tree, it's always better to, if you had 7 hours to cut down the tree, it's better to spend 6 hours sharpening the axe and an hour cutting. So another thing that you do in this pre-writing stage is develop an outline. Often we have a particular format, which is either numbered sections and subsections. The section numbers and headings and subheadings are critically important because they help the reader follow along and know where the content is, where they're going to find the information they need, and what to be on the lookout for. Now, as you're well aware, modern technology allows for us to automate the creation of the table of contents and the page numbers. And that is always, in some ways, a blessing, and in other ways can be a curse. Take advantage of that process, automatically go ahead and have the computer develop the table of contents and identify the page numbers. However, you will still need to proof and check and cross-check your work with respect to matching up the titles and subtitles and headings and page numbers of that table of contents with the content in your document. As we are well aware, machines can and do make mistakes, and I have found glitches in the system so that sometimes the page numbers don't match. Other times there are sections within the report that is a number of pages have been duplicated by accident, where the page numbers don't follow and there's a page missing and what have you. So as much as this is a bit of a nuance, it is critically important because your client is going to evaluate your professionalism and scholarship based on how meticulous and how careful we are to produce a polished and professional report. So we're now getting ready to do the report writing. But the very first thing we need to do is to assemble our background research. And when we do the background research, we should visit our libraries. And I would recommend going to an academic or college or university library. Even if you intend to use online sources through the internet, the best place to start doing research is the library. The reason I say that is, as much as the internet and the electronic media is a tremendously valuable source, many times the areas of research and the areas of presentation that we're talking about are so specialized that we need to go to primary sources. And those primary sources are only found in the books and the reports that are available in good, thorough, professional, scholarly, academic archives. So when we go to those archives, you can talk to the librarian. You can ask them to examine their databases, gain access to those books, the scholarly journals, the periodicals, and other sources that are typically not available online. Now, that being said, as I said, librarians are excellent resources when you're working on a report. They can help you find the books and articles and other credible sources that you need. And if you find most of the information you need in the library, you, of course, can use your online sources to supplement the information. Those can provide the other details that you need that you can't find elsewhere. Now, another tip, advice, and counsel on writing reports is, as much time as you think it might take to do a report, give yourself more. It takes a long time to write a report. Don't leave that research element to the last minute. It's absolutely critical that you do your background research in advance of writing the report. Get the information together, establish the archives, the databases, the background reports that you need, the maps, the tables, whatever else you're going to need to put the report together should be at your fingertips at that time. If you don't give yourself enough time, you'll end up with a slipshod and an unprofessional and non-scholarly effort, and it'll show. Now, the other thing that's absolutely critically important when you're doing your background research, and I've seen this done often, is use primary sources. What's a primary source? Well, a primary source is the original data upon which other people developed reviews and syntheses and integration of data about a particular topic. And what I mean is, the original researcher is a primary researcher, someone who did the original data collection, the interviews, the actual investigations, the discoveries. You can get syntheses and summaries and derivative secondary data, but unless you go back to those primary sources and cite and reference those primary sources, again, it looks, when someone reads it, they can tell that you're not doing a thorough, scholarly, and professional job. The other thing that I see done all the time is people have they get lazy, and they will say that, oh, you know, the data and the publications that they cite are from decades and decades ago. They're very ancient. With many of the scientific studies, the fields of archaeology, anthropology, whatever sciences you're doing, data and publications are constantly changing. Discoveries are made, information is now available that wasn't done. Some of the techniques and the strategies and the methods in which we have to present this information changes. So we need to be current with our literature. We need to have the most up-to-date information. And rather than referring back to ancient sources, it is a more credible and more professional way to use those sources that are most recent and have some of the newest discoveries integrated into the report. So, as I mentioned, we can go ahead and find in the fields of anthropology, archaeology, history, and other related fields, information changes radically. So if you want to do an excellent job, you need to go the extra mile to do what's right. And so what I encourage you to do is to go to the library and find the most recent copies of the journals, the scientific discoveries, be it anthropology, archaeology, history, or whatever field, and be certain that what you're representing is currently the cutting edge, newest way and newest information that relates to the subject at hand. Next, I would recommend that you use only scholarly sources if you do use online research. You can find a lot of information online, but it's often hard to sift through. What I'm saying is that all the material on the internet is often not very authoritative. It's not material which has been peer reviewed. So to ensure you're getting the highest level sources, you need to use an academic search engine like Google Scholar or LexisNexis. Check the academic scholarly platforms like academia.edu or ResearchGate or the other repositories of academic scholarly research articles and books. And you can avail yourself of those online, and you'll get some authoritative, cutting-edge information that is relevant by known experts, publications that have been in peer-reviewed journals and have been published and vetted online. And those will be very helpful to you. So to get into the meat and potatoes of a report, the first thing that a client and someone who's reading your report will see, besides the title page, is something called the executive summary. That's a brief overview of the entire contents within the report. Now, sometimes that's the thing that's written at the very last. It's a good, I can understand that. But I would also say it could be one of the best things to do first. Because if you begin to mock up in an executive summary the way in which you're going to communicate all the various elements that exist in such a report, then you have a sense of the entire report contents, its organizational structure, its substance. And if you have a working draft of the executive summary, you obviously have a very good understanding of what's going to be in the report. And you're also going to be aware of what order that information should be presented and the general character and nature of that content. So, remember that in many cases, and I've seen this from various clients, from the government to private developers, in many cases, a busy executive and a manager will only read the executive summary. Hence, they think and they want that executive summary to be the most crucial element of the entire report. They want that to be a Reader's Digest condensation of every bit of the most important information that occurs inside that report. So make sure that all the important elements that are critically of value to your clients are in that executive summary. That's going to include the purpose of the report, the methods, the analysis, the results, the conclusion, and probably for management, the most important thing is your management recommendations. So let's say we put together a rough executive summary. The next section is the introduction. Now, the introduction sets out what you plan to say, provides a brief summary of the problem under discussion. It also should touch on briefly your conclusions. So it should let the reader know, here's what we're doing, here's what I plan to accomplish, here's kind of the way in which I'm going to tell you about the nature of my study. And a very successful professional, one of the top scholars in my region, told me or taught me how to do reports many years ago. He said the best way to write is to tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. So, and that should be the structure of the report itself and also the structure of each and every section within the document, sort of the Reader's Digest version. And if you stick with that kind of a format, where you set the stage for the entire report, you give the readers a detailed roadmap to the nature of the way you're going to present the information, how it's going to be presented, in what order, and the character of your study. And that's a tremendous value. It really helps the reader in terms of understanding and wrapping their mind around your report. So, in the introduction, you're going to tell them where to find the maps, tables, and photographs. You're also going to tell them what materials are in the appendices. Are they important? Well, you bet they're critical. Otherwise, they wouldn't be part of the report. And these are all relevant questions that you need to provide simple, direct, easily understood, transparent narratives, all in the introduction. Further in the introduction, the reader needs to get the gist of what you're trying to communicate. In a long report, the reader is apt to get lost. They need a guide. They need an introduction. They need a way to know how the report is organized, what you're going to tell them, where are the figures, how about the references? Are they interpaginated in the text, or are they in the back and the body of the report? Where can they find the references? Etc., etc. All those information, all those sets of the working materials of a report need to be briefly touched upon in the introduction. So, we've done our introduction. We're moving to the main body of the report. The main body of the report has to be carefully structured as well, in a way that leads the reader through the study. You got to split it into sections using numbered or alphanumeric subheadings related to the themes or the areas of consideration. For each theme, you need to set out clearly and concisely the main issue under discussion, and any other areas that might need to be discussed and might be difficult or provide a bit of disagreement. And all this information that you present has to be related back to the precise subject under discussion. So if you get lost in a tangent, if it's not relevant to the precise direction and substance and character intention of the report, leave it out. If it's a doubt, don't include it. Or better yet, ask your client if they want it included, and if it is peripheral, see if it can go in an appendix. Archaeological reports and cultural resource management documents. Archaeologists use data compiled from archives when they do the archival background research from their field work and their lab analysis that documents their work. When we look for guidance, there is a piece developed by the National Park Service. It's called the Secretary of the Interior Standards Guidelines for Archaeology and Historical Preservation. The document defines standards and guidelines for archaeological documentation. It gives you at least a bit of a roadmap, a bit of a recipe, telling you what you need to include in these reports and publications on the results of your studies, be they surveys or test excavations or data recovery or what have you. And those are available throughout the country. For each particular state, there's always a different set of guidelines. So these guidelines provides archaeologists with technical advice about the kinds of archaeological documentation methods that they expect to see included in a report. As I mentioned, each state has its own set of standards and guidelines. And you can always contact the local SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, for state-specific guidelines or idiosyncrasies in the way they want to perceive or see the report developed. An archaeologist uses this documentation, these guidelines, to compile and develop their archaeological report. So when they're doing this archaeological and cultural resource report, at the very beginning of the report, there's usually a section called project purpose or goals or something along those lines, where they have to identify what's the reason for this report. What's the project's goals? What's the project's purpose? If there's research questions to be addressed with a specific scope of work, we need to specifically restate in detail, in summary fashion, what was the purpose of the study. Was it a survey? Was it an evaluation? Was it data recovery? Was it an archival study? Etc., etc. What was the character and purpose of this report? In that section, what we would expect to find is what was the plan of attack or the methods, and what was your expected results of those methods. If there were surprises or unexpected findings, those would also be included. If we have an excavation, why did we excavate? Where did we excavate? How much did we excavate? Etc., etc. And what are the expectations of your client or the reader in terms of reading this particular report? What will they get out of this study? And what were your conclusions? How would those relate back to the scope of work provided by your customer? Always in archaeological and cultural resource reports, one of the most important elements, of course, is to delineate the project area. The report must describe the geographic boundaries of the area proposed for development and the project site. You need to include a description, not only the area's physical environment, but the history of development there. What impacts have occurred, how much of it is in natural state, what sort of developments are there, what's the landforms. If there's been previous surveys or previous excavations, we need to identify those and reference the reports. If there's previous surveys, etc., those need to be referenced and identified. And in this project area and description, we provide a very detailed and exacting characterization of the project as to its impacts and potential effects to the natural area. So when you do that, the project description indicates precisely the character of those impacts. Where are they going to occur? How are they going to occur? Where are they going to be on the landscape? How broadly impacted or affected will the landscape be? How deeply will those impacts occur? What will be the direct impacts and the indirect impacts? Those on the surface of the ground, those within the subsurface context. What depth, what size footprint? What about the staging areas, the laydown areas, the infield office, the equipment parking, new roads? And what are those footprints, as they're called? What are the physical limitations? And of course, they want to see maps of everything, both the vertical or horizontal area of potential effects as well as those that are subsurface. Next, when we're doing our archaeological and cultural resource reports, we move to field work. So when you're summarizing the field work, you must identify and document all aspects of the field process. What did you do? Why did you do it? Who did the work? When was it done? How did the landscape look when you were doing that work? What are the current land uses? How far apart did you survey? What about the features or artifacts that were uncovered and discovered during the field work? If you use any remote sensing, walkover surveys, shovel testing and excavation, augers, screening, you must share with the reader and with your client the specific methods, very, very specific about how those particular strategies were completed, what the methodology was. Identify your sampling and recording techniques, Note any problems with bad weather, site access, visibility of the ground, etc. Again, include maps, photographs, and document your work. Next would be analysis. You analyze the artifacts or the archival data or the discoveries or not the discoveries that you have come up with after you have completed your field work. The report, of course, lists each artifact recovered from the site or during the survey. If there's lab analysis that's required, you study the various artifact types and you share the distribution across the site. You date the artifacts using various dating methods. You conduct floral and faunal analysis, pollen samples, soil analysis, geomorphology, geoarchaeology. Often these days we talk about the potential for buried sites. You also talk about landscape evolution. What is the landform that you're working on, where the project is located? How ancient could that be? What sorts of sites would be possible within that landform? And if you didn't find anything, if it's a negative report, why didn't you find anything? And that's something that is becoming much more common in the nature of these studies when we have to defend the absence of data. When you come to results, you present your findings. The report must summarize, of course, the data. Use figures, charts, graphs, and tables to present the information in sort of an easy-to-use and understandable way. You also need to present your reflections upon that data. How confident are you in these results? Tell the reader, he or she will appreciate your candor and transparency. And you have to answer the question, could you have missed anything? Are you confident of the results? Is this a thorough and rigorous treatment? If you did an excavation, are you confident that the sample that was presented is really characteristic of the site and does give you a good glimpse of what was going on in the past? After you present the results, you have a section typically called Discussion and Recommendations. You discuss the results. What are the implications of these results? The report must evaluate the project in terms of its goals and objectives, provide recommendations for ongoing research. Also include the implications for the discoveries made at the site. Evaluate your discoveries. What did you find out? What does it mean? Were new sites discovered? Are they significant? And if they are significant, why? If so, what would your client think about those sites being significant? Is the area still sensitive? Meaning, did your research provide just a glimpse and we need to do more work? Do you need any of the areas that you have examined protected? Do you need Native American or archaeological monitoring? If so, why? What are the laws regarding late discoveries when they go to construct the project and find something in the midst of a subsurface investigation? And of course, most importantly, what are the laws related to the post, late discovery of human remains, burials, offerings, etc. This is all fairly standard, but each one of these elements, of course, is very critical. So the structure of the report, the conclusions and recommendations, the conclusion sets out what inferences you've drawn from the information you've gleaned, includes the results of your studies. They may include recommendations, or these may be included in a separate section. The recommendations suggest to you and your client how you think the situation could be improved. So they have to be specific, achievable, measurable, and defensible. These are often called cultural resource management recommendations. They often have financial implications. So you should set these out clearly and in a way that your client can understand the nature in a defensible way as to why you have come to those conclusions. One aspect of writing a report that is a scholarly, professional, academic report is the use of references. And many authors feel that this is a, perfunctory element, so it's not that important. They say, references are references, we'll put them in there, but nobody's going to check them, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's really far from true. I know that when I've reviewed reports over the course of my career, I always check the references first. It's one of the first things I do, because it shows how scholarly, how professional, how meticulous the individuals were when putting their report together. And I often find that within the body of the report, where they have in-text citations, some of those in-text citations are not found in the references cited bibliography. And then in the references cited bibliography, I often find references that do not appear in the body of the report. It's just poor scholarship, it's unprofessional, and it shows that one is sloppy about the way in which they're preparing their report. So you should be absolutely rigorous and meticulous in terms of examining the references that appear in the body of the report and comparing it to the references cited in the back of the report, in the bibliography, and vice versa. That's something that's critically important, and I think it's something that people who are professionals, scholars, who would like to be seen as exemplary and producing excellent reports need to give careful consideration to. I know it's not a simple exercise, and there are different ways of doing the standard bibliographical format. So if you're an archaeologist, and if you're using the American Antiquity Style Guide, which is one of the standards in our profession, you might notice that Style Guide has changed. It's updated regularly. And if you go back to the Style Guide and you study it, you find out that many of the things you might have thought were the way to do in-text citations, references cited in the body of the report, and how they appear in the bibliography are different. So some of the things you might find when examining this Style Guide for American Antiquity is that parts of a reference are italicized. They go in italics. Do you know why sometimes titles of books and journals are italicized? And why not? Why not others? So in the nature of our profession, if something is published formally, meaning it's disseminated in a way that someone would say that's a professional publication, it has multiple copies, and these can be gleaned from some sort of a source and are available in a library or available from a book or journal publisher, then they're italicized. If we have things that are called gray literature, very, very limited in publication, and usually a 1 or 2 off, and the originals are very, very limited and only found as archival sources, those are not italicized. And that's an important distinction because, as you're well aware, most of the publications done, or most of the research done within cultural resource management is never published. It's in gray literature, as it's called. So given that, and given if someone is trying to research or compare or evaluate the expertise and the results of a publication, they want to know where to find the gray literature. So you always must include within the references bibliography where you can find this original piece of gray literature. And so it says on file, then there'll be a place that one can find the original document. When you cite online literature through the internet, You have to put the date and when the material was accessed and include that full and complete hyperlink, the URL to that publication. And for some reason, I don't know why, but according to the American Antiquity Style Guide, when you access material online, it's considered a formal publication, and it is indeed italicized. You can double check, but that's what I understand. I know it's a little bit, odd, but that's what I understand. Also, I understand that if you're using the American Antiquity Style Guide, you have to use the full first names of all your authors, and they expect to be seen in full. Often, I find that that's not done, but according to the Style Guide, that's what they accept, and that's what they expect. Now, if you have multiple publications by the same author, you need to alphabetize those multiple dates that appear in the body of the report. So if something was published in 2019, this author published multiple reports, and it was by him alone, he would have a 2019A and a 2019B. There would be no 2019 without a letter, because the letters represent the distinctive publications. When there's multiple authors that have the same last name, and you need to reference them, then you have to use the first letter of their first name within the in-text citation. So that helps the reader when they go to the bibliography and are trying to find the reference, so they'll be able to differentiate between the various authors. So I can go on and on and on about the problems with bibliographies, references cited, but I don't want to basically hyper-focus on that. But don't let that overwhelm you. Just read the proper style guide, refer to it often, proof and double proof your work. And also remember that we stand on the shoulders of the giants, that the researchers and scholars that have come before us, we can best employ their efforts and access their information. And we can demonstrate our own expertise and core competency by being rigorous with those references. Now, we're not quite through yet. Once we have what we feel to be a working draft of our report that we feel is professional, well put together, and covering all the bases. Let's say we have what we call an advanced draft. Then comes a very, very important element to the process of producing a professional, high-quality report. It's called quality assurance and quality control, QA/QC. And often, consulting firms are asked for what their process is for QA/QC. Quality assurance means it's a part of what they call quality management, focused on providing confidence that the quality requirements will be fulfilled. That confidence is provided internally to management and externally to customers. Customers are government agencies, regulators, whatever other sort of clients, your developers, what have you. So if you want to define quality assurance, it's all those activities, those systematics, those plans, those ways in which we can demonstrate that we can provide a confident, thorough, defensible report that is of quality, that fulfills all the requirements, and those requirements would be the compliance level instrument, be it a state level compliance or a federal compliance. There's also a thing called quality control. Quality control can be defined as the part of quality management focused on fulfilling quality requirements. So if you have quality assurance, relates to a process of how we performed or how a product is made. So if we're talking about trying to make sure that the pagination is correct, that the format is correct. All those various mechanics are something that we need to do. And we need this critically, called QA/QC, to ensure that we have a defensible, high-quality product. Now, most importantly, and this is done not by all researchers, not by all cultural resource managers, but I would heartily recommend that it's a good idea, in fact, a great idea, after you have your report in draft fashion, to disseminate it for peer review. Provide it to others who will look at the report and let you have their feedback as to the validity and the professionalism with which that report was prepared. In my 40 years of doing archaeological research and cultural resource management, anthropology, what have you, I've written over 500 reports. I've got them in my bibliography on my 30 or 40 page resume. I've got about 350 of them identified. Some are very, very small. They're a single page or a form. Others are 2,000 pages in length. I published about 50 articles, about a half a dozen or more books. So in lessons learned, if you're doing an important report, a study, a white paper, a cultural resource management document, an archaeological research report, get your peers, people who know something about what you're doing, to look at it before the fact. Before you submit it, before you publish it, before you disseminate it, get somebody who knows what they're looking at and is familiar with these kinds of documents to do it in advance and give you feedback. Now, I do that broadly. It's not just a one-off. I might do it to send it out to half a dozen different people, because everybody has a different way of looking at these materials. Do this, and you'll improve your writing greatly. And your thinking and your ability to receive, attaboys, accolades from your peers will go up drastically. It's good medicine to hear from your colleagues. They'll show you where the holes and gaps are in your thinking and will vastly improve your finished product. I would listen to those people who indicate, well, this is ambiguous, this is not clear, here's a reference that you've missed, this is actually inaccurate. Simply see the whole process as a means of improving your skill and your ability to produce better and better, more professional, more quality, more scholarly reports. And if you do that, if you continue on this journey over the course of your career, your reports will improve, your scholarship will improve, and you'll be able to complete these reports in a less challenging way, and one with less angst and less problems. I hope the presentation was a help, and certainly I'm amenable to your contact with me, and I appreciate the opportunity to share my knowledge. Thank you.